Welcome to the CMO Chapter podcast, where we dive deep into the dynamic world of Chief Marketing Officers. Join us as we explore the careers, insights, and strategies of top marketing executives who shape the brands we know and love. Whether you're a seasoned marketer, aspiring CMO, or simply just curious to understand what it really takes to step into the shoes of a CMO. This podcast is your backstage pass to discovering what it's like to really lead and innovate in the ever-evolving landscape of business. Stay tuned as we uncover the stories of the visionaries behind the brand. I am absolutely delighted today to welcome Martin Kelly. Now, I have known Martin for, God, I don't even know now, 15
Let's
years.
just skip over it.
A long time. A long time. So I'm really excited and delighted to have Martin on the CMO Chapters podcast show. So Martin, I'm going to let you kick off. Would you kindly introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Martin Kelly. I'm from the accent you can hear, originally from Scotland. Been here over 20 years now. I'm the field marketing director for Brandwatch, though I do need to do the caveat. I'm speaking here as an individual, not on behalf of Brandwatch, as all good marketers should say. I've been in the industry over 20 years now, got my master's from Monash here, and I've sort of nicely jumped around some different verticals deliberately. So, yeah, but that's where I am now.
Excellent. Fantastic. And so I guess I'm going to start off with, as we know, there's a little bit of an accent there, we know, from Scotland originally. So I want to, a lot of the guests some of the guests I've sort of spoken to have originally, they come from different countries, etc. So I want to ask about, how did you find, you came here 20 years ago, so you've had to really work probably twice as hard, to really sort of tap into, building out your brand, etc., within an Australian market. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? I know it's a big question just to kick off.
Look, I suppose, and this comes down, so yeah, how I ended up getting here, long story, but met an Australian girl, lived in London for a couple of years, then she wanted to move back. She'd been overseas for 4 years at that point. So did at one point go back with her to the UK for a year, but and then eventually she wanted to get into marketing, done a little bit in my undergrad, so then came back, did a master's at Monash, and finally sort of broke into the marketing space. Probably it is harder because you don't have old school friends you can tap into. You don't have those people from the first 2 or 3 jobs to tap into that have all grown together. But a big one is then networking, going to I'll use the word network like 57 times in this podcast because I'm actually really passionate about it. The amount of people that go, I remember going in being just asked to go into a marketing society at one of the unis. It's probably now about 10 years ago now, from when I was working for a previous company. And one of my things was, and there was a young guy, and he's like, I really try to break into marketing, but I get no contacts. And I'm like, okay, so what have you done about that?
Yeah.
And he's like, what do you mean? Now, this is when every man, it's probably longer than 10 years ago now, every man and his dog was on Facebook. And I'm like, did you put a post on Facebook to all of your contacts saying, does anybody know anyone in marketing that can buy me or that I can buy a cup of coffee to? And he's like, no. Now, it actually worked out he went to school with my nephew. So actually, he could have had me, come out. So part of that is then it's forcing yourself to network, which sounds ridiculous, but going to conferences, using, I think part of it is the live stuff, going to conferences, meeting up with people, knowing each other, staying in contact, even if it's the odd text message, if it's the cup of coffee type thing, when you're, if you've got contacts in different cities, when you're there, going right.
Yeah.
I'll fly in it instead of, if your meeting's at 10, flying in at 7 and grabbing a coffee at the airport with somebody or, close to, but it's not, and a lot of time it's not Svengali type, just using them for it. These guys are brilliant. These are guys they can give you some really good advice, but you've got some really good, you can make some good friends out of that.
Absolutely.
as well. And then using technology, like what companies do you want to work for? Who can you follow on LinkedIn? What advice can you get from them on LinkedIn? And if you can, the biggie would be trying to find yourself a mentor. Trying to find yourself somebody that you can meet once in a while and have that conversation and
Uh-huh.
go. And I had one a few years ago. I've sort of got one now. I don't think she knows she's my mentor, but I think she is. And we catch up every 6 months. But I remember I was sort of starting to look for a job, and I didn't have the confidence, and I was always wary. And I remember talking to this guy, and his line was, "Do you know what you're looking for?" And I said, "I'll know it when I see it." What do you want?
Yeah.
He went, "Martin, you're probably scared to take the leap of faith." And his advice was, on a bit of paper, draw out, and if the job's 80, everything you're looking for, and if any job is 80% of that, apply and go for it. And I needed that. I needed that kick in the butt. So sorry, I think I've sort of, but yeah, that's
Okay.
sort of the advice.
And so, I mean, obviously, I mean, you really, I mean, I personally think I agree, completely. Like, I think networking is absolutely one of those major channels that I think, given that we've gone through COVID, we've all been locked up, we should absolutely be making the effort to be more out there. So I'm guessing, given that you're such a big advocate for it, has actually networking really helped you in your career, like in terms of getting, say, from one role to another, or knowing somebody, or getting, how has that actually helped you?
Like, there's like the couple of basic things of getting the people you trust to even just look at your CV, and you would be one of those people that,
Thank
you
you.
know seriously, like, you said at the start, and you're one of the recruiters that I totally trust. You're the one that I will send people to, and they're look, but you're also the one that, if I need the advice of, and it might not be a role that you're trying to recruit for, but it'd be the one where I pick up the phone and go, "I've got this situation.
Mm,
What do you think?" Now, but also, yeah, if you take it back to the absolute basics of when you're looking, the person that sends you the text message going, "We're trying to recruit for this position. One, do you know MD? Or two, do you want to apply?" But it doesn't even have to be that direct. It can be I need somebody to look at my CV, or probably the biggie of, I'm applying for a job with this company. They're about to make me an offer. Do you know somebody that works there that I
yeah,
can have an off the record chat to? Um, so I think it's all of those things, but it's probably also just the simple advice. So again, the person I was talking to that I catch up with every sort of 6 months for lunch, some of the advice that she gave me was, is about staying in a role. And she just interviewed somebody, and they had about 20 years worth of experience, but they had 2 years experience 10 times. They just kept doing the same job over and over again. And her line was, just make sure you're not in that situation. I
yeah.
had got to there. I'd done a role for about 11 years, and probably for the last 4 or 5 was just doing the same stuff over and over again. So that's really helped. So I think it's almost
Wow,
every part of the
checking.
box. It is that, as I said, something as perfect as, we're looking for a marketer. Can you help us?
Yeah.
To help them with the CV, to the unofficial references, to the general advice. So yeah.
So how I want to ask. So and I've got an estimation in my mind, but how long would you say? How many years is it now that you've been actually as a like marketing director level? Are we saying sort of like 7 or 8 years? Am I?
Well, it's sort of, yeah. So actually, well, depends on the title, but in reality, running the region generally, and running the teams, probably
Yeah,
about
10
10 years,
years.
sort of thing. Yeah.
So I mean, I had a look at your career, previous. Obviously, I feel like I know you quite well now, but I want to ask. I mean, have you always personally had that ambition to get to marketing director, or one day GM sort of stage, or is it been a case of, as we know, we get more experience, you go from another to another to another, sort of like, I just want to understand sort of like how ambitious you've been.
Um, Look, I've always been ambitious, but not crazy
Yeah.
ambitious. So I'm not the person that, steps over the dead body to apply for the
Yeah.
role type thing. But I've also realized, as your career goes on, there's a point where that you just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Well, in order for you to have time to do the bigger role, you need somebody else in to do the role. Now, that's not demeaning the role, because some of those stuff I've loved, and it's been really good. But you've needed to build a team, and you've needed to get more experience, and you realize the excitement, the thing that gives you fire in the belly, the one of, that new experience, the thing that you're stretching yourself. You need a team behind you
Yeah.
that's taking care of some of the stuff so that you can take that leap of faith. So I've never been, looking at wanting a team of 75 and, crazy. But I've realized that you need to have teams supporting you in order that you can, and that everybody can grow through. One of my big bugbears, and it's something that I feel really passionate about, is the when you're trying to mentor somebody through, but you're not quite there yet. You're not quite there yet. I'm so against that. It's ridiculous because I've had it for a while in my career. So I'm very much okay. What are and I had this conversation recently, and it was with one of my staff, and it was, we've got the hard targets for the year, but what are our soft targets that are going to help us get our targets, and doing some thoughts about that. But then also on that progression, right? This is what we need to see, and it being a proper conversation, not a bang. This is
Yeah.
what you need to do. It's okay. Can you present? Can you do this? Can you take ownership of this? Can you manage this? Can you do this right? At that point, I think you're here. You can do 80 to 90% of those, then that gives me some stuff to allow me to hand it over so I can do other things that are going to keep me. So yeah, I think there's that. Like, as I said, I've never been I want, 800 employees and that crazy one. But yeah.
It sounds like you've got a solid head on your shoulders in terms of, you're ambitious, but you're not going to you're realistic at the same time. I guess on that, it was something actually sort of dovetails quite nicely. A question that I do ask quite a lot of people is, and I know I've personally been in this situation myself, as we get more senior, you get a team, you might start off with 2 direct reports, and then you may go to 5, or it might get to 10, etc. So, and there's no, from what I understand, I mean, there's no real like rule book in terms of how best to manage a team. So, I mean, how have you sort of really refined that from your perspective?
Like trial and error
Yeah.
a lot of the time, and um, but also learning from good managers, and probably learning more from bad managers. That would be my one. So there's a couple of things where I look back on my career, and information. Now, not all information can be shared, and we all have that situation. But there's other times when you're like, you kept me in the dark about this for, there was one about we're going to launch a brand, and it kept getting delayed, and marketing had got all the merch, and we'd got an entire plan, and we then kept updating the plan, and eventually I sat in a review and just went, where are we at with this? And they're like, oh, we'll tell you when you need to know. And I went, I see, guys, that's not good enough. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, I've got merch that I've now spent money on rotting, not rotting, but also when you decide, 1st of June to launch it and want me at a conference on the 10th of June, that's not doable, sort of thing. So I think it's that. But I think the big one is bringing them along on the journey,
Yeah.
sharing information, sharing goals and objectives, working with them. In communication, it's funny, I thought about this the other day. I did one job years ago, and it was a 6-month contracting job, and it became a bit of a shocker, to be honest. And it was only sort of a while later did I look back and went, our manager never met with us and never found out
Gosh.
what's happening in the team. And it
Really?
was only,
Right.
yeah, really, and it was one of those where we went, and it became just a schmozzle. So
Mm,
and it is that. So it's that communication. It's giving time to staff. Now, there's also the flip side of let the staff get on themselves with you. I had an old boss in London who I still think of, and I learned a huge amount from. And he was like, "You're the expert in this. I'm not. I'm not going to tell you how to do the job. If you screw up, we can help you back, but just let them get on with it. What are their skill sets?" So, but I think the big one is bringing them along on the journey, sharing as much as you can, sharing the objectives, and but also, and I'm going to call out, and an old boss of mine, guy called Chris Harrick, and it was his line, which was, "If you're not failing, you're not trying anything new." So having the culture of, we're going to have a crack at this, and we're going to hold hands. And my line is, we're going to hold hands and jump off a cliff. But it is that one of, let's take it. And I'm not talking about stupid risks. I'm not saying you take your entire budget and put it on the back of a plane or something, right? A skywriter type thing. But I'm saying, do you know what? We've never been to this conference. Everything looks okay. We'll make the decision. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. But let's not review in hindsight, So, yeah.
In general, I want to understand from your point of view. I speak to a lot of marketers, coordinators, but also, I'm going to say marketing managers, even that are at that sort of like 120, 130 mark, who, in their mind, one day want to be at that, 200 sort of mark, whether it be GM, head of, etc. Is there any advice that, sort of top level that you go, you know what, if you are seriously thinking about going up to the next step and going into, that real sort of director or head of level, what advice would you say give those people?
Like a couple of things. So first, network. Secondly, study. Be reading, and it doesn't always have to be marketing books. And I've got a couple that I'll chat to you about if
Sure.
But and there's also listen to other things, listen to different podcasts, listen to different movies. Don't just be the guy that only reads marketing books, because you'll learn more from a cookery book, or you'll learn more from that obscure, going for a bike ride. So have a balance in life. And then the sort of more detailed stuff would be understanding the balance in marketing between data and art, or science and art. It's the difference between them. And the biggie, and probably one of my mistakes early on, was not looking enough at the data. Now, I've also seen people go too skewed and purely at it, and they're like, "Oh, but," and you go, "Yeah, but we got these things out." And there's the stuff that you can't track. You track what you can, and you do your best to track it and report on it. But there's going to be someone that was at an event that moves to another role, that gives you a different email address, that suddenly there's and that weird one. I was at a conference last year, and we got everybody that we scanned, and it was perfect. And literally, I'm at my desk, and one of the sales guys goes, "Yeah, Marty's just behind me. He was the guy who saw present." And I was like, I didn't know. That was a lead from that event that they happened to hadn't downloaded anything, but and went away, or hadn't downloaded anything directly. So I think it's knowing the data so you're making informed decisions. Now, there's, and also being able to question the status quo, being able to, when it is, that market's rubbish, that market's so a role I had, and the sales staff would not follow up at MD with a free email address or Gmail, blah, blah, blah. And I did an analysis, and when there was, I think it was something like 300,000 or 400,000 worth of pipeline, and $100,000 worth of sales made from people that come in with free email last year. And they were like, "Yeah, but it's a waste of time." And I'm like, "You really want to leave that on the table?" So it's that balance sort of thing between, knowing that. But yeah, the big one would be know your numbers enough that you can make informed decisions.
Yeah.
But also be willing to take the odd risk here and there.
I've heard that before, actually, from a few, leaders, where it is very much, I think initially you go into marketing, we've all got our areas for development. And I think, I know it's something that I'll put my hand up. I've had to, get my head around P&Ls and, numbers. And, I've had some very interesting conversations with my accountant that, gobbledygook in my book. But anyway, we get that. In terms of, I guess, one thing that I know can be sometimes a challenge, and sometimes when it works really well, it's a match made in heaven, is when marketing and sales work really well together. That beautiful marriage. But as we know, doesn't always happen. So what's your advice, to anyone who, say, I guess, what have you done in the past to sort of really merge that relationship? Because it can be difficult sometimes.
Look, I've got war stories from when it hasn't worked. And I remember at one point talking to and I had to report into him, but talking to the sales director about an event, and he's like, staff don't really fancy that one. And I went, it's in Tasmania in June, and they quite fancy going to the Gold Coast, but this event in the Gold Coast is terrible. Yeah, they think there's a lot of value in it, and me going, can you prove it to me? Because at this point, and also it's my budget. So, a bit like the staff thing, bring them on the journey. Now, I am ridiculously lucky at the moment at Brandwatch, and I've been since I started here. Great relationship with sales, very much cooperative, very much working together. I also make it clear that I'm not beholden
Yeah.
to sales, but I take them as I take their counsel quite a lot. So it's taking them on the journey, but not be beholden to them and sharing information. I've worked for companies that, like I work for one company, and once a week I would literally just do a really quick update of this is what's happened the previous weeks, this is what's going up in the next 2 weeks. And I didn't think there was anything surprising about that till about 4 weeks in, and a couple of sales guys went, we've never known this. And I'm like, what do you mean you've never known? Like, how can you not have known that we're doing a webinar, we're going to a live event, we're doing that, we're doing a mail out? And he's like, nothing was ever shared. So it's, but also being careful that sales are there to close business or to get people in the top of the funnel. So helping them as much as you can as well.
Yeah.
I think that's that. And also being respectful for their job. It's really easy at times for marketers wrongly to be really arrogant and to have a go at sales. I'm not in sales for a reason because I don't think I could do it. All right. And I've got the utmost respect for people that do it. So, and I think maybe that helps me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I think it's that it's the mutual respect, it's working with them, it's bringing them on the journey. But it's also then, again, knowing their targets. I think one of the issues when sales and marketing fall out is when marketing drinks its own Kool-Aid and decides to do some magnificent thing that's in the wrong market, to the wrong people, to the, like, you should know, like, you should make sure that you're aligned. So, yeah, I think that's it, who, what, why, when, where, and how. What are we actually targeting? The amount of people that is like, we're targeting these people, and the sales guys go, we're targeting the wrong people. And you're like, well, you need to tell me that.
Yeah.
We need to, we need to have an agreement as I'm building the marketing plan that we're in agreement. And again, then back it up with data. Again, okay, guess what? 75% of our sales have come from this title or this region or this state or that, or this vertical or whatever. So yeah.
Back it up. Yeah, the data component's really important. Absolutely. Is there any, as you sort of, as you've obviously developed, etc. I mean, is there any sort of resources specifically, or events, or even, I guess, thought leaders, if you will, that you've personally admired from afar that you would recommend our listeners also tuning into, or books, etc., that you think would be really beneficial?
I'm a massive fan of the story brand idea. And the reason for that is it's too easy for you to get caught up in your own information, and it needs to be, is it important to customers or not, or your potential customers or not. So, knowing that a warehouse has 40,000 widgets, nobody really cares. Knowing that we can get you something within an hour, I care about that, So the story brand one, there's a couple, the first 90 days. So for anybody starting a new job, I've shared it. And when this comes out, I'll share the image of it again.
Yeah,
Massive fan of that. The Leaky Funnel, again, big fan of that book. And the recent Trout Marketing Warfare, that's one that I read once every couple of years to just keep my thought. Those leaders wise, it can be everything. It can be the guy that does Atomic Habits. I quite like him purely because it is that, rather than I'm going to start running, I'm a runner.
Yes.
And it sounds a little bit corny, but I think also just marketing wise, Sutherland at the moment, I'm seeing a lot of stuff from him that makes total sense. like the one of Coke, and it's the you would have thought the competitor with Coke would have been cheaper, larger bottle, where Red Bull is,
Yeah.
a smaller bottle and more a much smaller can and more expensive. Um, I think there's that, and then there is just the general people that you see that do well for themselves in business, and you go, can I learn
Yeah.
a bit from them?
Yeah.
And again, that's about LinkedIn, following them up or following them on social. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And I want to ask a little, probably tap into more. So, personal branding is another little real key point that I feel like nowadays, as we're getting more senior, there's some that really thrive in that personal brand and they go, well, I want to be that person who's, a panel expert, I'm a judge, or, I want to be presenting at conferences. Then you get some that actually go, I'm really not interested in that. It's just not me. But when we talk about personal branding, I mean, that obviously means everything how you portrayed in work and how you portrayed, on LinkedIn and online, etc. Have you had to really work at that yourself, or is that something that you've been quite aware of that you've wanted to focus on? And if so, how have you done it?
Look, it's something I've been aware of, but I've also had to work on it. So like, there's a couple of things. One, I do quite like presenting. That's why I'm on doing this. Probably also, I think as you get a little bit older, I've seen a few people that I call it let the old man in. So then there was one guy we worked with. I'm definitely not going to name names, but he retired at 60, and I was having a conversation maybe 2 years ago, and I'm like, he was only 60. He looked like 75.
Ah,
Like he just and as I said, I think he dressed old. He acted old, like everything, he'd like, as I said, the old man in sort of thing. I think it's also what do you want to do and where do you want to be
mm,
and how, like, so if you are very much don't want to present, don't want to do any of this, that's fine. If you do, put yourself up for doing it. I've seen a thing in a few socials that I really rate, which is your first podcast will be good, but it'll be, and your 100th will be a hell of a lot better, but you won't get to the 100th without, it's
absolutely.
um,
Yeah.
putting yourself up there, like putting yourself up to, you know, even just purely present at work, like again, I go back to years ago at a company and we'd have I think it was a month, it was either monthly or a quarterly management, and I started to attend. And everybody else would take their report and just read through it. And I knew I had to work on my presentation style. So I'll put together a PowerPoint and I would stand up in front of everybody and I would present. And I would get feedback from somebody I trusted in the room and a different person each time. And when there was a speaking slot at work, I'd put my hand up to it. And it's not just that. When can you do that? When have you got offered a podcast? You take it on. Can you also dip your toe in the water?
Yeah.
Don't go from I've never spoken at work to suddenly in front of 5,000 people, right? Well, can you come onto a webinar and do special comments on it? Can you be on a panel at a conference or, a 5-minute intro? Can you simply introduce people at lunch or, something like that? Like dip your toe in the water, make it a journey type thing. And then there is a point where you need to give yourself a break. So that they've, again, this is going back to presenting. I'd spent, and it was a couple of years, and I mean, even things like I used to have both hands up, like almost like a southern
Ah,
preacher. And I actually used to wear a belt and grab the belt so that one hand was fine, two hands were, and at the very end, and as I said, it's been about a 2-year process. And I presented at a staff conference and I got some advice from a guy, yeah, really, really trust him. And he's like, Marty, you're not Marty anymore up there. So, whoa, whoa, whoa. And when you're like, oh,
right.
what? He's like, everything you're doing's right. So just relax now. And theoretically, you wouldn't lean on the lectern when you're presenting.
Mm,
But if you feel it's necessary, lean on the lectern. If you want, be yourself up there because you're ticking all the boxes. You're almost robot, So it's that. What do you want out of your personal brand? Where do you see yourself going? And then how do you get there? And a lot of that is speaking to people. It's funny. couple of last year, I think I was flying to Singapore. I can't remember. Got talking to a couple of guys just on the plane, and one of them was like, he went to get a job, internal interview, hadn't got there, and I'm like, okay, so did you go back and say, how do I get
Right,
there?
yeah.
And he's like, no. And I said, okay, can I suggest? And but it's one of those, you don't want to
Yeah.
be the old man. I don't want to be Grandpa Simpson. You're talking about my time.
Yeah.
But as see, if I was you, I'd go and say to him, okay, I'm here. I want to be here. Then maybe it is you need to go back and do a master's. Maybe you need to do some crazy and you don't want to do that. But also, it means when that next job comes up and you go to the interview, you can go, remember you asked me to do A, B, and C? I've done A, B, and I'm working towards C.
Yeah.
So I think it is that. But yeah, personally, it is something I've worked on. Something
Yeah.
I like. I like presenting, but you need to work on it. And you also need to see how you come across. You need to be looking at a lot of things, but you also need to give yourself a break and just be yourself as well.
Yeah.
As I present from my son's bedroom, because there's no other rooms available in the house. So yes.
Well, you're looking at that very, very professional. We're all good. We're all good. Something I just want to pick up on there, actually, that you've just mentioned. I think it's a valid point to address, and something that I know I've spoken about in the past is the feedback side of things. Something quite early on in my career, that, well, one of my directors, we're going way back, like 20 years ago, she used to say to me, whenever you get one promotion, always ask, well, what do I need to do to get the next? And I used to think, God, is that not really cheeky? And she said, well, no, because you need to be knowing, well, what's the goal? Like, where's the target? Or else, this whole succession planning. And I also think with that, it ties into the feedback side of things because, at the end of the day, never ever be scared to ask for feedback. I think it's so important because, it could be not quite the magical words that you want to hear, but at the end of the day, you're going to really learn from it. And, is that something? I mean, you mentioned that you asked for feedback, and I thought, well, kudos to you because I bet there's a lot out there that don't.
Yes, I think you should be. The only caveat to that would be also listen to some of the feedback and see if it's relevant or not. So something I worked for somebody at one point who would find fault in anything, and no matter what you did, would concentrate on the name tag being wrong rather than the 300 people at an event that was up there with Robbie Williams at Net type
Yeah.
thing, right? So I think there is that. It's getting the balance. I'm a massive fan of feedback. I'm a massive fan of what can we do, like doing the honest debrief. Well, okay, what can we have done? What can we not? There's also a reality check of if you want that, then it's going to cost. So it means this. So
Mm-hmm.
we and a couple of roles we've done stuff where you've done a live event and there's name tags. And there's like, can we not just get one of those printers? They can, but they cost X amount.
Yeah.
So that means we've got X less staff or we've got X number of clients. And that's the balance. So I'm a massive fan of asking for feedback. I'm a massive fan of exactly what I talked about before with staff of here's the goals, doing a constant review of them. And again, probably one of my biggest, and this is jumping back to the previous question, is making sure you're looking at the goals. Too often, say your goals in January, and on the 31st of December, you get the dust off them and you're like, well, let's look at these goals rather than, actually, we're going to set up X amount of time to get you to this position. So it is constantly been looking to how you can improve, constantly looking for feedback, but also be wary that some of the feedback you don't need to take on board. Now, there's also some times when if you screwed up, you need to take it between the eyes and go, right, I won't do that again. But there's also times when you go, you really are telling me, you're really giving me that feedback. Okay. And it has to be a look, thanks, I'll take it on.
Micromanaging.
Yeah, seriously, I've had a couple that I think back on and you go, I did all of this and this is what you're concentrating on.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
And just finally, I want to ask, when you look back at, I mean, I know you've got many more years to go, I have no doubt, but when you look back at where you are so far and look back at your career, I guess what's the legacy and impact that you'd like to think, well, I know I made a difference there, or, is there anything that really matters to you?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably some of the staff that you've worked with and that you've mentored them. And I think that's the biggie. But I think also some of the big projects you've taken on when you started and you went, there's no way we can do this. And suddenly you do it. So there was a company, we did a massive event overseas. And it was one of those, it was literally 2 years in the planning, and it was my baby. And you took it from, really small to, and you look at that and you go, at the start, I never thought we could do it. So it's having that, was it, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time,
Yeah.
or more you can chew and chew like hell sort of thing. But I think it's that, and I think you have made a difference. You have moved things forward. I did one role, and it was only for a year, and I then caught up with, it was a contracting role. Somebody was off on maternity leave, and I caught up with it was one of those, a whole lot of people were moving, and I moved on. But then I caught up with the new regional director, and the conversation was, there's been a real legacy here because you did set the standard. So yeah, I think there's that, and I think you look back on stuff, but there's always did you challenge yourself? Did you take some risks?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I look back on the time where I wasn't taking risks, and that's the one where there's not a legacy generally at all, or there's very little, because you're like, there was a a fear culture or something, where the ones where you go, right, let's go in. And there's been a couple of times when I've went and it's almost been the blank bit of paper, and you go, right, I need to build this from scratch. It's the ones that you go, okay, I took it from a blank paper to, humming along nicely. So yeah.
And I think as well with that, you made a valid point. I think it's when also from the top down, and I'm talking like, owner, founder, CEO, MD, board, you need to be in sync to also have that appetite to go, well, we're going to think a bit more, more around innovation and, what are we doing that the competition aren't, as opposed to a little bit of what I think is what happening is in the market is a bit vanilla. How many businesses actually are taking risks right now? We're hiring direct for direct industries. And
I remember looking for a couple of roles, and one, and it was ridiculous. One, they wanted somebody with 10 years worth of that industry experience. There was 4 of the companies, but they didn't want to have somebody from a competitor. And I remember like talking to the HR person going, can we just go through that again? just so that I'm missing, maybe I'm, there's a time to miss here stuff. And I went, you want somebody with industry experience, but not from your competitors? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. So it's sorry, and it is that one of, and there was one industry I looked at, and it was literally a merry-go-round, and I remember speaking, going, totally get that, but don't ever complain that somebody doesn't do something different. Like, what do you mean? I went, because all you're doing is just on the merry-go-round. So I think it is that one of, let's take some risks. I quite like what Jag has done. Now I've seen all hell break loose online, telling them that everything's terrible. I think at least they've done something different.
Yeah,
Now, maybe this can be one of those ones that comes back and bites me when they go broke. And then in a year's time, and it's like, who thought that was a good idea? But again, being vanilla, you can't always play it safe.
Yeah. Well, Martin, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I always enjoy chatting to you, but I've really enjoyed it. It's been really great. So thank you so much. It's been great to have you on.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Remember, the road to CMO isn't always linear. It's filled with challenges, decisions, and moments of transformation. Whether you're charting your course or navigating a career shift, the experiences, wisdom shared today, as with our guests, is invaluable. Thank you for joining us. Keep dreaming big, keep pushing boundaries, and remember that your journey towards becoming a CMO is as much about the destination as it is about the growth you experience along the way. Until next time, continue to innovate, evolve, and carve out your path to CMO.